There was no peace in my final moments, only a desperate gasp for air in a sterile room at Cedar Ridge Hospital. My mother-in-law, Adelaide, hovered over my bed, unceremoniously slipping the diamond wedding ring off my frail, cold finger to hand to my husband. Davion didn't even possess the decency to look at my face. "She's finally gone, darling," Adelaide whispered, her fake sympathy thick and cloying. "Now you can have the life you actually deserve." As the darkness took me, a hatred so absolute consumed my soul that it tore right through the fabric of time. When the shadows finally lifted, I wasn't dead. I was standing in my own kitchen. 5 years in the past. The board was reset, and the game had just restarted. The beep of the heart monitor was the soundtrack of my failure. In my previous life, I had spent 10 years building a boutique marketing firm, Apex Communications. From the ground up, I had also spent 10 years trying to build a family with Davion. I loved him with a blinding, stupid loyalty. But to his mother, Adelaide, I was never anything more than an obstacle. A walking ATM who wasn't submissive enough, wasn't fertile enough, and wasn't old money enough. When the ovarian cancer hit, it hit hard and fast. I was 34. Instead of supporting me, Adelaide convinced Davion that my illness was a financial burden, a divine punishment for my career-obsessed arrogance. As the chemotherapy stripped me of my hair and my dignity, Adelaide moved in. She didn't come to nurse me, she came to audit me. In my final days, heavily medicated and slipping in and out of consciousness, Davion brought me a stack of papers. "Power of attorney," he had mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. "Just for the hospital bills, Chloe. I signed them because I was too tired to fight, too weak to hold the pen properly." Within a week, he had transferred the controlling shares of Apex to a shell company Adelaide owned. They drained my personal accounts. They left me to die in a low-income hospice ward, having transferred me out of the private suite I had paid for myself. My last memory was Adelaide's smug, heavily powdered face hovering over mine, prying the Cartier love bracelet off my wrist, the one I bought for myself on my 30th birthday. "This will look lovely on Fiona," she had sneered, referring to the country club socialite she had always wanted Davion to marry. Then, the darkness. Then, the smell of burning toast. I gasped, my hands flying to my throat. I wasn't breathing through an oxygen tube. My skin wasn't paper-thin and bruised purple from IV lines. I looked down at my hands. They were full, healthy, and my wedding ring sat snugly on my left ring finger. "Chloe! Are you trying to burn the house down?" The voice made my blood run instantly cold. I turned around. Standing in the doorway of the kitchen, dressed in his tailored Brooks Brothers suit, was Davion. He looked young. The faint gray lines at his temples that had appeared during my illness were gone. He was frowning at the toaster. I stared at the digital clock on the microwave. The 12th of October 2021. I gripped the edge of the marble island to steady myself. I remembered this day. God, how could I forget it? This was the exact day Adelaide lost her townhouse due to a bad investment and moved into our guest room. In my past life, this was the day the war began. I had thrown a massive fit, demanding boundaries. I had argued with Davion until 2:00 a.m., fracturing our marriage and giving Adelaide the perfect ammunition to paint me as the cruel, unhinged wife who hated her husband's poor, defenseless mother. "Earth to Chloe?" Davion snapped his fingers, looking annoyed. "My mother is going to be here in an hour. Is the guest room even ready? I know you're not thrilled about this, but you could at least pretend to be supportive." A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I felt the phantom weight of the Cartier bracelet on my wrist. I remembered the coldness of my hospital bed. "Of course it's ready, Davion," I said, my voice shockingly steady, smooth as glass. I walked over, popped the burnt toast out, and tossed it into the bin. I walked up to him and adjusted his silk tie, looking deep into those weak, easily manipulated brown eyes. "I've been thinking about it, and you're right. She's your mother. She needs us. We should make her feel as welcome as possible." Davion blinked, completely thrown off guard. He had been bracing for a fight. Wait! Really? Really, I beamed. In fact, I'm going to run out and buy those expensive Egyptian cotton sheets she loves. The 800 thread count ones from Bloomingdale's. We want her to be comfortable, don't we? Davion smiled, a genuine relieved smile that made me want to vomit. Wow. Thank you, Chloe. I knew you'd come around. She's only going to be here for a few months until she gets back on her feet. She's never leaving, I thought to myself. And neither of you are going to survive what's coming. Whatever she needs, I whispered, kissing his cheek. I'm going to give her exactly what she wants. Adelaide arrived at precisely 11:00 a.m. in an Uber Black, dragging 4 scuffed counterfeit Louis Vuitton suitcases behind her. She was a woman who wore her vanity like armor. Even practically bankrupt, she sported a fresh blowout, a heavy spritz of Chanel No. 5, and a condescending glare that could curdle milk. In my past life, I had met her at the door with a list of house rules. I had guarded my home like a fortress, which only made her more determined to conquer it. This time, I threw the front door open before she could even ring the bell. Adelaide! I cried out. Rushing down the front steps, I grabbed her heaviest bag, ignoring the way she flinched at my sudden display of affection. Welcome home. Let me take these. You must be absolutely exhausted. Adelaide stood frozen on the porch, her perfectly drawn-on eyebrows raised to her hairline. She looked at Davion, who had walked out behind me, grinning proudly. Chloe was just out buying you new sheets, Mom, Davion said, puffing out his chest. She wanted everything to be perfect. Is that so? Adelaide said, her voice laced with deep suspicion. She stepped into the foyer, immediately scanning the room for something to criticize. Her eyes landed on the antique Ming-style vase near the entryway. Well, it's quaint. Though I don't know why you insist on keeping this dusty old thing right by the door. It's a tripping hazard, Chloe. In my first life, I had snapped at her not to touch it, as it was a gift from my late father. She had purposefully knocked it over 2 weeks later, claiming it was an accident. You know what, Adelaide? You are completely right, I said brightly. I walked over, picked up the $4,000 vase, and casually shoved it into the hallway closet next to the winter coats. Better safe than sorry. Come look at your room. For the next 3 weeks, I played the role of the Stepford wife so perfectly it would have terrified anyone who truly knew me. When Adelaide complained that my cooking was too salty, I profusely apologized and asked her to teach me her recipes. When she rearranged my living room furniture while I was at the office, I complimented her eye for spatial design. I gave her absolutely nothing to fight against. Without a wall to push, Adelaide was losing her balance. She needed an enemy to bind her and Davion together. So, she had to pivot her strategy to the one thing she loved more than control: money. It started on a Tuesday evening. We were sitting in the dining room, picking at the dry roast chicken Adelaide had insisted on making. Davion, darling, Adelaide sighed, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. I saw you looking at that new Porsche 911 online. It's a shame you can't get it. A man in your position at Sterling Financial needs to project an image of success. Davion looked down, embarrassed. It's not really in the budget right now, Mom. We're trying to put more into the joint savings for, the future. He meant a baby. A baby I now knew I would never, ever have with this man. Adelaide shot me a subtle, venomous look. Well, I just think it's emasculating that a grown man has to ask his wife for permission to buy a car. When your father was alive, he managed the finances. It's the natural order of things. A man feels trapped when he doesn't have financial autonomy. In my past life, this conversation resulted in a screaming match. I had pointed out that I made double what Davion made, and that his allowance was to prevent him from blowing my hard-earned money on depreciating assets. Davion had deeply resented me for it. I put down my fork and wiped my mouth. I looked at Davion, letting my eyes well up with fake tears. Is that how you feel, Davion? I asked, my voice trembling perfectly. Do you feel trapped? No, Chloe, of course not, Davion stammered. caught off guard. Because if you do, I would be heartbroken, I interrupted, placing my hand over his. Your mother is right. You work so hard. You shouldn't have to consult me for every little thing. It's humiliating for you, and I've been so blind. Both Davion and Adelaide stopped breathing for a second. I'm calling the bank tomorrow, I declared. I'm taking my name off your primary checking and your trust account. I'll also transfer the $150,000 from the secondary emergency fund into an account solely in your name. You should manage it. You are the man of the house, after all. Davion's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. Chloe, are you serious? You don't have to do that. I insist, I said softly. Adelaide looked at me as if I had grown a second head. She was trying to find the trap, but her own greed blinded her to the reality of the situation. She had just been handed the keys to the castle. What they didn't know was that I had already spent the last 2 weeks quietly securing my assets. I had moved my company's holding accounts to a new bank in the Cayman Islands, under a newly established trust they knew nothing about. I had hired a forensic accountant and a ruthless divorce lawyer named Valerie Hayes. The $150,000 I was giving Davion was the rope. Now, I just needed to let Adelaide tie the noose. With financial freedom, Davion transformed. Or rather, he reverted to his true self. A spoiled, impulsive narcissist with an inflated sense of his own intelligence, entirely molded by his mother's delusions of grandeur. Within a month, the Porsche 911 was sitting in our driveway. The $150,000 emergency fund was decimated by the down payment, the exorbitant insurance, and the designer clothes. Davion suddenly felt he needed to match the car. Adelaide praised his every move, fueling his ego until it was practically a blimp floating above our house. This is just the beginning, Adelaide purred one evening, sipping a glass of my expensive Merlot. You are meant for so much more than being a mid-level manager at Sterling Financial, Davion. You are a visionary. I was sitting in the armchair reading a book, quietly listening to the poison drip into his ear. I know, Mom. Davion sighed, staring out the window at his new car. But breaking out on my own takes capital. And an idea. Well, Adelaide said, her eyes gleaming with predatory excitement. I spoke to my nephew Greg today. He is putting together a phenomenal investment group. I almost laughed out loud. Greg, Adelaide's sister's son. The man was a walking Ponzi scheme. In my first life, Greg had pitched a revolutionary luxury car import business to Davion. I had hired a private investigator, uncovered Greg's 3 previous bankruptcies and pending fraud lawsuits, and threatened to leave Davion if he gave Greg a single cent. I saved Davion from a federal indictment. Adelaide had cried to the entire extended family that I had crushed Davion's entrepreneurial spirit out of spite. Greg? Davion asked, intrigued. What's he working on? It's a high-end, exclusive import-export venture. Mostly European luxury vehicles. He needs a silent partner with strong business acumen. He immediately thought of you, Adelaide lied smoothly. Greg had thought of Davion because Davion was an easy mark. He needs a buy-in of $500,000. He guarantees a 300% return in the first year. Davion's face fell. Mom, I don't have $500,000. I just spent a ton on the car. My accounts are basically empty. He looked at me. A pathetic, pleading dog. Adelaide looked at me too. This was it. This was where I was supposed to say no, lock down the finances, and become the villain again. I closed my book and smiled. That sounds like an incredible opportunity, Davion. Adelaide blinked. You think so? Absolutely, I said, standing up. Davion, you've always talked about wanting to be your own boss. Greg is family. Who better to trust? If we don't take risks, we never reap the rewards. But the money, Chloe, Davion said, pacing. I can't ask you to fund this. Your company is doing well. But $500,000? Oh, I wouldn't use Apex money, I said casually. But what about the house? Davion stopped dead. The house? We have tremendous equity in this house, I lied smoothly. We did have equity, but I had secretly already moved my half of the title into my untouchable trust via a complex legal loophole Valerie had orchestrated, citing liability protection for my business. If Davion took out a loan, it would be secured against his name and his remaining portion of the estate. A home equity line of credit, Adelaide gasped, her eyes widening with greedy realization. Chloe, that is brilliant. Davion, you could take out the HELOC. The house is half yours. The return on Greg's business would pay it off in months. I don't know. Davion hesitated. He was weak, but he wasn't entirely brain dead. The idea of risking his home terrified him. This is where I needed to push him over the edge. I needed him totally compromised. And to do that, I needed Adelaide to deploy her ultimate weapon. The next weekend, I suggested we host a dinner party to celebrate Davion's new business venture with Greg. I told Adelaide she could invite anyone she wanted. I knew exactly who she would invite. Fiona Kensington. Fiona was a tall, striking blonde, whose family owned a string of failing country clubs. She had expensive tastes, a trust fund that was rapidly running dry, and a moral compass that pointed strictly toward whoever was buying her drinks. Adelaide had always wanted Fiona as a daughter-in-law because Fiona looked the part of old money. When Fiona arrived at our house on Saturday night, draped in a sheer silk dress that left very little to the imagination, Adelaide practically shoved her into Davion's arms. "Fiona, darling, look at you," Adelaide cooed, ushering her into the living room. "Davion, doesn't Fiona look absolutely stunning?" Davion, slightly tipsy on scotch, flushed red. Yeah. Hi, Fiona. You look great." I watched from the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres. In my first life, Adelaide had tried to sneak Fiona around behind my back. When I caught them having lunch, I was devastated. I had cried to Davion, begging him to establish boundaries with his mother. Tonight, I was the ultimate wingwoman. I walked into the living room, setting the tray down. "Fiona, so wonderful to finally meet you. Adelaide talks about you constantly." Fiona looked me up and down, clearly assessing the competition, and finding me lacking in my simple black slacks and blouse. "Chloe, nice to meet you. Lovely. Little home you have here." "Thank you," I smiled brightly. "Though we might be upgrading soon. Have you heard about Davion's new venture? He's about to become a major partner in a luxury import firm." Fiona's eyes instantly locked onto Davion like a heat-seeking missile. "Really? An import firm? How powerful of you, Davion." Davion puffed his chest out, adjusting his collar. He couldn't help himself. The attention from a woman like Fiona, combined with the false narrative of his impending wealth, was an intoxicating cocktail. "Well, it's in the early stages. But yes, we're looking at massive returns." "He's being modest," Adelaide chimed in, watching the interaction with absolute glee, completely ignoring my presence. "He's securing $500,000 in funding this week." I watched Davion sink into the sofa next to Fiona. I watched her hand rest accidentally on his thigh. I watched Adelaide look at the two of them with immense pride, already planning my exit from the family. Yes, Adelaide, I thought, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. Feed him to the wolves. Tell him he's invincible. Set him up with a woman who will drain his bank accounts faster than a hemorrhage. The next morning, Davion went to the bank and signed the paperwork for the $500,000 HELOC loan. He transferred the money directly to Greg's offshore account by Tuesday. The trap was set. The safety net was gone. And now, I just had to sit back and watch them burn their own house to the ground. The weeks following the transfer of the $500,000 were, for Davion and Adelaide, a glorious, intoxicating fever dream. For me, they were a masterclass in surveillance. I hired a private investigator named Mitchell, an ex-NYPD detective who charged an exorbitant hourly rate but delivered results with surgical precision. I didn't need him to find out if Davion was cheating. I already knew he was. I needed him to document the cheating with the kind of irrefutable, high-definition evidence that would make a family court judge wince. It didn't take long. With the false confidence of a self-made millionaire, Davion became reckless. He stopped coming home immediately after work, citing business meetings with Greg regarding the import venture. In reality, Mitchell's photographs showed Davion's sleek new Porsche parked outside Fiona's luxury high-rise apartment complex 3 nights a week. What truly fascinated me, however, was Adelaide's role in all of this. In my past life, I suspected she had known about Fiona, but I never had proof. This time, I had a front-row seat to her complete. One Thursday evening, I came downstairs to find Adelaide carefully steaming a dark navy Tom Ford suit in the laundry room. "Big night for Davion?" I asked innocently, pouring myself a glass of water. Adelaide didn't even flinch. She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on the lapel. "Yes, actually. He has a crucial networking dinner at Le Bernardin tonight. High-level investors. It's strictly business, of course. So, wives aren't invited. He didn't want you to feel left out." "How considerate of him," I replied, taking a sip of water. I knew for a fact that Mitchell had tracked a dinner reservation at Le Bernardin under Davion's name. But the plus one wasn't an investor, it was Fiona. Mitchell had also intercepted the delivery of a $2,500 pair of diamond drop earrings to Fiona's address earlier that day, paid for with the credit card linked to Davion's new, personal account. "He's under a lot of pressure, Chloe," Adelaide added, her tone shifting into a patronizing lecture. "A man carrying the weight of a massive enterprise needs peace at home. I hope you're not bothering him with trivial household issues." "Never," I smiled. "I want him to have all the freedom he needs to build his empire." His empire was already bleeding him dry. Between the payments on the Porsche, the expensive dinners, and Fiona's insatiable appetite for designer gifts, Davion's personal account was draining at an alarming rate. He was living the lifestyle of a millionaire on the salary of a mid-level manager, banking entirely on the mythical 300% return Greg had promised, and because he believed he was on the verge of extreme wealth, Davion's attitude at his actual job at Sterling Financial took a sharp nosedive. In his mind, he was no longer an employee. He was a titan of industry, merely biding his time. He began showing up late. He delegated his reports to junior analysts. He openly mocked his department head, Arthur Pendleton, during a Zoom meeting I happened to overhear while working from home. Arthur was a conservative, old-school finance guy who valued loyalty and hard work above all else. In my first life, Arthur had actually been the one to warn me about Davion's declining performance right before my cancer diagnosis. This time, I decided to accelerate the process. I arranged a coincidental run-in with Arthur and his wife at a charity gala I knew they attended every year. I wore a stunning emerald green gown, my hair flawlessly styled, projecting the image of a successful, supportive wife. "Chloe, what a pleasant surprise," Arthur said, shaking my hand near the silent auction tables. "I haven't seen Davion tonight. Is he around?" I let my smile falter, perfectly calibrating a look of deeply concealed exhaustion. I looked down, wringing my hands slightly. "Oh, Arthur. Hello. No, Davion couldn't make it. Well, he's working late again. He's been so focused on his new side venture." Arthur's thick gray eyebrows furrowed. "Side venture? What side venture?" "Sterling has a strict non-compete and outside business disclosure policy." "Oh goodness," I gasped, bringing a hand to my mouth as if I had just made a terrible slip. "Please, Arthur, forget I said anything. It's just a small import-export project with his cousin. He's poured $500,000 into it, and he's been so stressed. I keep telling him not to let his work at Sterling suffer, but he's just so convinced he's going to be the next big CEO. It's putting a lot of strain on us." I let a single, masterful tear gloss my eye before quickly blinking it away. "I just worry about him. He respects you so much, Arthur. He's just lost his way a bit." Arthur's face hardened into a mask of professional outrage. $500,000? "Chloe, I appreciate your candor. Davion has been missing deadlines for 3 weeks. Now I know why. Please don't be too hard on him," I whispered, playing the devoted, long-suffering martyr. "I have a department to run, Chloe," Arthur said stiffly. Enjoy your evening. I watched Arthur march away, his jaw clenched in fury. I picked up a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Taking a slow, celebratory sip, the dominoes were lined up. Now, they were beginning to fall. By November, the crisp autumn air matched the sudden chill setting in over Davion's finances. Greg's promised 3-month turnaround for the first dividend payment came and went. When Davion called him, Greg was full of slick, practiced excuses. There were supply chain bottlenecks in Rotterdam. The luxury vehicles were held up in customs due to new tariff regulations. He just needed a little more time. Davion, desperate to maintain his facade, accepted the lies. He had to. Admitting Greg was a fraud meant admitting he had mortgaged his future on a phantom. But the reality of his bank balance could not be ignored. The HELOC loan required a massive monthly interest payment. Davion's credit cards were maxed out from funding Fiona's lifestyle. The tension in the house grew thick. Davion started snapping at Adelaide over small things. Adelaide, terrified of losing her golden boy's favor, doubled down on her delusions, assuring him that great men always faced adversity before their triumph. Meanwhile, I was quietly securing my fortress. My lawyer, Valerie Hayes, was a shark in a tailored Chanel suit. We sat in her high-rise office overlooking the city, reviewing the final pieces of my financial extraction. "You've executed this flawlessly, Chloe," Valerie said, tapping her gold pen against the thick file on her desk. "Your business assets are entirely walled off in the Cayman Trust. The house title was legally modified to protect your equity under the guise of corporate liability shielding, which Davion signed off on without reading. Bless his arrogant heart. The HELOC is strictly in his name, secured against his remaining theoretical equity." "And the evidence from Mitchell?" I asked. Looking at the stack of glossy 8x10 photographs on the table, Valerie smirked. "It's a slaughterhouse. We have proof of infidelity, dissipation of marital assets. He's spent over $60,000 on this Fiona woman in 2 months and reckless financial endangerment. When we file, he won't get a dime of your money, and he'll be saddled with the entire debt of the HELOC." "Don't file yet," I said, my voice cold. "I want the bomb to drop all at once. I want him to hit rock bottom before he even realizes he's falling." I left Valerie's office and went straight to the Cartier boutique on 5th Avenue. I walked up to the glass display case and pointed to the love bracelet in yellow gold. "I'll take it," I told the sales associate. "I'll wear it out." As the associate locked the delicate gold band onto my wrist, a profound sense of closure washed over me. In my previous life, this bracelet was a symbol of my stolen dignity, pried off my dying body by a woman who saw me as nothing but a parasite. Now, it was a badge of victory. I wore it proudly, letting it catch the light as I walked back to my car. When I got home, the atmosphere was suffocating. Davion was sitting at the kitchen island, his head in his hands, staring at a stack of mail. They were overdue notices. Adelaide was pacing the kitchen, her anxiety manifesting in a flurry of nervous energy. "Davion, you simply have to call Greg again. Tell him you need an advance on the dividends. Fiona expects you to take her to street. Bart's for New Year's, and you cannot look cheap in front of a woman of her pedigree." I leaned against the doorframe, admiring my new bracelet. "Is everything okay, darling?" I asked, my voice dripping with false concern. Davion jumped, quickly throwing a catalog over the overdue bills. "Fine. Everything's fine, Chloe. Just business headaches." He noticed the flash of gold on my wrist. His eyes narrowed. "Is that new? That looks expensive." "Oh, this?" I held up my wrist. "It's just a little treat to myself. My company landed a massive account today. I figured, since you're doing so well with your import business, we can both afford to splurge a little." Davion's face turned the color of old ash. He swallowed hard, a drop of sweat forming at his temple. "Right. Yeah. Of course." Adelaide eyed the bracelet with pure, unadulterated envy. "Well, it's a bit flashy, isn't it? A modest woman wouldn't flaunt her wealth so aggressively, Chloe. You should be putting that money into savings to support your husband's endeavors." "Oh, Adelaide, you're so right," I laughed, a bright, chilling sound. But Davion doesn't need my little marketing money, do you, sweetheart? You're a visionary. You're practically a titan. Davion looked like he was going to be sick. He excused himself and practically sprinted upstairs. The pressure cooker was screaming. It was time to blow the lid off. The collapse began on a Tuesday morning in early December. I was at my office, reviewing a marketing campaign, when my phone buzzed. It was Mitchell. The feds just raided Greg's offices in Miami. Mitchell's gravelly voice came through the speaker. It's all over the wire. Total Ponzi scheme. He was using new investors' money to pay off the old ones, and pocketing the rest to fund a severe gambling addiction. They're estimating $20 million in losses. Greg's in federal custody. I closed my eyes, savoring the absolute perfection of the moment. Thank you, Mitchell. Your final check is in the mail. I hung up and checked the news on my computer. There it was, a breaking news banner on a local financial blog. Miami luxury importer indicted on federal fraud charges. I didn't call Davion. I didn't rush home. I simply poured myself a cup of Earl Grey tea and waited for the explosion. It happened at 2:00 p.m. My phone rang again. This time, it was Davion. Chloe, he choked out. He sounded like a man who had just been hit by a freight train. He was hyperventilating. Chloe, I need you to come home. Right now. Please. Davion? You're scaring me. What's wrong? I asked, keeping my voice steady and fearful. Just come home, he screamed, the panic tearing his voice to shreds. I took my time packing up my briefcase. I stopped for a latte on the way. When I finally pulled into our driveway, I saw Davion's Porsche parked haphazardly on the lawn. I walked through the front door and was hit by a wall of chaos. Davion was tearing the living room apart, throwing throw pillows and kicking the coffee table. Adelaide was sitting on the sofa, her face buried in her hands, sobbing hysterically. What on earth is going on? I demanded, dropping my bag by the door. Davion spun around, his eyes wild, his hair disheveled. He's gone! He's in jail! Greg! It was all a lie, Chloe. A massive federal lie. What are you talking about? I played dumb, taking a step back. The money. The $500,000. Davion dropped to his knees, gripping his hair. It's gone. The feds froze his accounts. The SEC is involved. There are no cars, there is no business. He stole everything. Adelaide wailed louder. My poor nephew. He must have been set up. Greg would never do this to his own family. Shut up, Mom, Davion roared. A sound I had never heard him make in my life. The golden boy's mask had completely shattered. He pointed a trembling finger at her. You brought him to me. You told me he was a genius. You told me to take out the loan. I was only trying to help you secure your future. Adelaide cried defensively, clutching her pearls. You're the man. You made the final decision. The betrayal in Davion's eyes was absolute. The unbreakable bond between the narcissist mother and the spoiled son was finally snapping under the weight of severe consequence. It gets worse, Davion whispered, his voice cracking. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Chloe, Arthur fired me today. He called me into his office at noon. He said my performance was a disgrace, that I was a liability, and that he knew I was running an unapproved side business. He terminated me for cause. I don't even get severance. I put a hand over my mouth, feigning absolute shock. Oh, Davion, I have nothing, Davion choked out. The bank sent a letter. We missed the first 2 HELOC payments because I was using my remaining cash to. He couldn't say it. He couldn't admit he was spending it on his mistress. They're threatening to begin foreclosure proceedings on the house, Chloe. He crawled toward me on his knees, reaching out to grab the hem of my skirt. It was the most pathetic display I had ever witnessed. Chloe, you have to help me, he begged. Your business is doing well. You have the savings. You can pay off the HELOC. You can talk to Arthur, explain that I was conned. Please, Chloe, I'm your husband. Adelaide suddenly stopped crying. Her survival instincts kicked in. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperate, calculating hope. Yes, Chloe, you have to step up. This is what marriage is about, for better or for worse. You have to save our home. Our home. Even now, she couldn't help herself. I looked down at Davion, kneeling at my feet. I looked at Adelaide, expecting me to be their savior, just as they had expected me to quietly die in a hospital bed so they could inherit my wealth. The time for acting was over. I gently stepped back, pulling my skirt out of Davion's grasp. No, I said softly. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Davion blinked, confusion washing over his tear-stained face. What? What do you mean, no? I mean no, Davion. I will not pay your debt. I will not talk to Arthur. I will not save you, I said, my voice dropping its sweet, supportive cadence. It became flat, cold, and entirely my own. Adelaide gasped, standing up. Chloe, how can you be so cruel? He is your husband. He made a mistake. You cannot abandon him in his time of need. A mistake? I laughed, shaking my head. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. I tossed it onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. A mistake is forgetting to pay a water bill. Mortgaging your home to fund a Ponzi scheme while funneling $60,000 into the bank account of a country club tramp named Fiona is not a mistake. It's a choice. Davion froze. His breathing stopped. He stared at the envelope as if it were a live grenade. Open it, Davion, I commanded. With shaking hands, he reached out and pulled the flap. Dozens of glossy 8x10 photographs spilled across the glass table. Davion and Fiona kissing outside her apartment. Davion handing Fiona a Cartier bag. Copies of his credit card statements detailing the hotel rooms, the jewelry, the lingerie Adelaide had happily ironed for him. Adelaide's face drained of all color. She stared at the photos, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. You, Davion whispered, looking up at me in sheer terror. You knew? I knew everything, I said, crossing my arms. From the very beginning, I knew Greg was a fraud. I knew you were sleeping with Fiona. I knew Adelaide was covering for you. If you knew Greg was a fraud, why didn't you stop me? Davion screamed, spit flying from his lips. You let me throw away $500,000. I didn't let you do anything, Davion, I replied coldly. You wanted to be a titan. Your mother told you that you were too good for a normal life, too smart to fail. I simply stepped out of your way and let you prove her right. I turned to Adelaide, who was now trembling violently. You wanted a rich, powerful son, Adelaide? You wanted Fiona as a daughter-in-law? Well, you have them, though I doubt Fiona will stick around now that the credit cards are declined and the Porsche is about to be repossessed. You monster! Adelaide hissed, her true venom finally breaking through the panic. You planned this! You trapped my son! No, Adelaide, I said, leaning in close so she could see the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. I just stopped saving him from you. I walked toward the front door, pulling my trench coat from the closet. Where are you going? Davion cried out, scrambling to his feet. Chloe, please. You can't leave. The house. They'll take the house. Let them, I said, opening the door to the crisp afternoon air. It's not my problem anymore. Oh, and Davion? You'll be hearing from Valerie Hayes tomorrow morning. I'm filing for divorce. And since the HELOC is solely in your name, and my assets are protected under a corporate trust you legally signed off on, you don't get a dime. I stepped out onto the porch, looking back at the two of them. They looked small, pathetic, destroyed. Enjoy the rest of your life, Davion, I said. You earned every second of it. I pulled the door shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet suburban street. I walked to my car, slid behind the wheel, and drove away without looking back in the rearview mirror. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I could finally breathe. The divorce proceedings were not a battle. They were an execution. I sat in the mahogany-paneled conference room of Valerie Hayes's law firm, sipping a perfectly brewed espresso. Across the expansive glass table sat Davion, looking as though he had aged a decade in a matter of weeks. His previously tailored suit hung off his shrinking frame, and the arrogant spark that usually danced in his brown eyes had been thoroughly extinguished. Beside him sat a public defender-level attorney he had scrambled to hire on a credit card that was likely already declining. Adelaide was not allowed in the room, but I knew she was pacing the lobby downstairs, her counterfeit Louis Vuitton handbag clutched to her chest like a life preserver. "Let's make this quick," Valerie began, her voice crisp and devoid of any human empathy. She slid a thick-bound document across the table. "My client is filing for a clean dissolution of marriage. Given the overwhelming evidence of marital fault, specifically the dissipation of marital assets to fund an extramarital affair, as well as the fraudulent encumbrance of the primary residence, we are offering a zero alimony, zero equity split." Davion's cheap lawyer, a sweaty man named Berman, cleared his throat. "Now, hold on. The marital home was purchased jointly. My client is entitled to half the equity, regardless of his personal indiscretions." Valerie smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "Did you actually review the title history, Mr. Berman?" 3 months ago, Davion willingly signed a quitclaim, transferring the protected equity into the Apex Corporate Liability Trust, over which my client has sole jurisdiction. Davion retained his name on the deed solely to leverage the HELOC loan which he took out individually. The bank is currently foreclosing on his liability. The trust's equity was cleanly extracted prior to the lien. Berman turned slowly to look at Davion, his face a mask of unprofessional disbelief. "You signed away your equity right before taking out a $500,000 loan?" "She told me it was for business protection," Davion hissed, glaring at me with a pathetic mixture of hatred and desperation. "She set me up. I protected my assets from a man who was actively draining our joint accounts to buy diamond earrings for his mistress." I corrected smoothly, setting my espresso cup down. "You signed the paperwork, Davion. You didn't even read it. You were too busy dreaming about Greg's phantom luxury cars." "The bottom line," Valerie interrupted, tapping her pen, "is that Davion leaves this marriage with the clothes on his back, the Porsche, which is 90 days in arrears, and the entirety of the $500,000 HELOC debt. If you fight this in court, we will make the infidelity and the financial negligence a matter of public record. Arthur Pendleton has already agreed to testify regarding Davion's termination for cause. Do we have an agreement? Or do I need to schedule a hearing before Judge Harrison?" Davion stared at the paperwork. He picked up a pen. His hand was shaking so violently that he could barely manage to scrawl his signature on the dotted line. He didn't say a word. He just stood up, pushing his chair back so hard it crashed to the floor, and bolted from the room. The financial ruin was only the first wave. The social destruction was far more agonizing for them, and infinitely more entertaining for me. Without my income, the facade of their upper-middle-class existence violently crumbled. The first casualty was Fiona Kensington. Mitchell, my private investigator, sent me one final complimentary update out of sheer professional amusement. A week after the divorce was finalized, the repo men finally caught up with Davion's Porsche. They didn't tow it quietly from his driveway in the middle of the night. They found it parked directly in the valet circle of L'Avenue, the ultra-exclusive French restaurant where Davion had foolishly taken Fiona for lunch in a desperate attempt to pretend he still had money. According to the valet staff, the repo men hooked the Porsche up right as Davion and Fiona were walking out. Davion had publicly begged the tow truck driver for one more day. Fiona, realizing the well had run completely dry, didn't even offer a word of comfort. She hailed a cab, stepped inside, and blocked his number before the taxi even pulled away from the curb. But Adelaide's downfall was the true masterpiece. Adelaide's entire identity was anchored in her perception of status. She belonged to the Oak Creek Country Club, a place where gossiping was an Olympic sport. In my past life, Adelaide had poisoned those women against me, painting me as a cold, neglectful wife. This time, I took the narrative. A week before the house was officially foreclosed, I attended the Oak Creek annual charity luncheon as the guest of honor. Having donated a substantial sum from Apex, I wore a stunning white Carolina Herrera dress, looking radiant, successful, and deeply, tragically betrayed. Adelaide had scraped together enough cash to attend. Desperate to maintain appearances, she walked into the ballroom with her head held high, expecting her usual circle of wealthy widows to embrace her. Instead, she was met with a wall of ice. I had strategically leaked the truth to Cynthia Harrington, the club's most notorious gossip. By the time the salad course was served, every woman in the room knew that Adelaide's nephew was a federally indicted scam artist, that Davion was unemployed and facing severe debt, and that Adelaide had actively facilitated her son's cheating. I watched from the head table as Adelaide approached Cynthia's group. "Cynthia, darling." Adelaide forced a brittle smile. "I love that brooch." Cynthia slowly turned around, looking Adelaide up and down with an expression of sheer disgust. "Adelaide, I'm surprised you showed your face here. I suppose you're looking for a new investment for your son? Or perhaps a new mistress for him?" The silence that fell over their corner of the room was deafening. I beg your pardon?" Adelaide stammered, her face flushing a deep, ugly crimson. "We don't tolerate enablers and frauds in this circle." "Adelaide," Cynthia said, coldly, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "you and your family are a disgrace. Please don't speak to me again." Adelaide stood frozen, humiliated in front of the only people whose opinions she valued. She looked across the room and her eyes met mine. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just slowly raised my crystal water glass in a silent, mocking toast. She turned and practically ran out of the ballroom, leaving her pride shattered on the marble floor. By February, the bank officially seized the house. I had long since moved into a breathtaking, ultra-modern penthouse downtown, overlooking the skyline. I watched the foreclosure unfold from a distance. Like a general surveying a conquered battlefield, Davion and Adelaide were forced to rent a cramped, two-bedroom apartment in a decaying, low-income complex on the industrial outskirts of the city. It was the exact type of neighborhood Adelaide had spent her entire life sneering at. The heating barely worked, the neighbors were loud, and the smell of cheap frying oil permanently stained the hallways. Davion, desperate for any income to keep them from starving, found out very quickly just how much weight Arthur Pendleton's word carried in the financial sector. Every firm in the city had blacklisted him. His resume, once a point of immense pride, was now a toxic liability. Eventually, reality beat the arrogance out of him. The former titan of industry was forced to take a job as a shift supervisor at a massive, warehouse-style auto parts store. He traded his tailored Tom Ford suits for a stiff, polyester blue polo shirt and a plastic name tag. He worked 50 hours a week on his feet, dealing with angry customers and breathing in the smell of vulcanized rubber and motor oil. The stress and poverty turned their tiny apartment into a pressure cooker of resentment. The unbreakable mother-son bond, previously cemented by their mutual disdain for me, fractured into 1,000 pieces. They had no one left to blame but each other. The final, catastrophic break between them happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Davion had just come home from a grueling 10-hour shift at the auto parts store. His back ached, his feet were blistered, and his bank account was overdrawn by $40. He walked into the dingy kitchen to find Adelaide sitting at the small laminate table, carefully applying a brand new tube of Chanel lipstick. "Where did you get that?" Davion asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. He knew exactly how much that lipstick cost. "Mom, we literally don't have enough money for groceries this week. I had to skip lunch." Adelaide refused to look at him, keeping her eyes fixed on a small, compact mirror. "A woman must maintain her dignity, Davion. I found a few extra dollars in an old purse." "Don't speak to me in that tone." Davion's eyes narrowed. He was tired, broken, and deeply suspicious. While Adelaide went to the bathroom to admire her reflection, Davion did something he had never done before. He searched his mother's belongings. He dug through the closet and pulled out her heavy, oversized faux leather tote bag. He bypassed the tissues and old receipts, unzipping the hidden interior pocket. His fingers brushed against a thick, folded stack of paper. He pulled it out. It was a current statement from a private wealth management bank. Davian stared at the numbers printed in stark black ink. $85,400. The blood drained from his face. His hands began to shake. Not from fear, but from a rage so pure and hot, it practically blurred his vision. When Adelaide lost her townhouse years ago, she had sworn to him that the bank took everything. She had sworn she was destitute, forcing Davian to move her into our home. When Davian was begging me for money, crying on the floor about the HELOC loan and the impending foreclosure, Adelaide had stood there and demanded I save him. All along she had $85,000 secretly sitting in an offshore account. What is this? Adelaide stepped out of the bathroom. When she saw the bank statement trembling in Davian's hand, the color instantly vanished from her heavily powdered face. Davian, put that down. That is private. $85,000. Davian whispered, his voice cracking. He looked up at her, his eyes wild with betrayal. You had $85,000 this whole time? When we lost the house? When I had to declare bankruptcy? When I was eating ramen noodles so we could pay the electric bill? Adelaide took a step back, her defensive instincts flaring. That is my survival money, Davian. I am an elderly woman. I couldn't risk giving it to you. You would have just blown it on that Ponzi scheme or that cheap blonde girl. I am your son, Davian screamed, throwing the papers violently onto the floor. I lost my career. I lost my wife. I lost my home. And you sat there, lecturing me, watching me ruin my life, while you had a nest egg hidden away? You ruined your own life! Adelaide shrieked back, dropping the aristocratic facade entirely. She pointed a sharp, manicured finger at his chest. You were weak. You let Chloe outsmart you. You were supposed to be a success. And instead, you're ringing up windshield wipers for minimum wage. I am not sacrificing my last shred of security for a failure. The word hung in the humid air of the cheap apartment. Failure. Davian stared at the woman he had worshipped his entire life. The woman who had told him he was a god among men. The woman for whom he had destroyed his marriage. He finally saw her for what she truly was, a parasite who only loved him when he was useful to her. Get out, Davian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadened whisper. What? Adelaide gasped. Get out of my apartment! Davian roared, stepping toward her with such ferocity that she flinched, shrinking back against the wall. Take your Chanel lipstick! Take your secret bank account! And get out! I never want to see your face again as long as I live. He grabbed her suitcases from the closet and threw them out into the hallway, scattering her clothes across the dirty carpet. He physically shoved her out the front door, slamming it shut and locking the deadbolt as she pounded her fists against the wood. Screaming his name, Davian slid down the back of the door, burying his face in his hands, weeping uncontrollably in the dark, empty apartment. He was finally, completely, alone. A year passed. For me, it was a year of unprecedented growth. Without the emotional deadweight of Davian and the psychological warfare of Adelaide, my mind was sharp, focused, and unburdened. Apex Communications doubled its revenue. I expanded the team, opened a second office in Chicago, and secured contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. I was healthier than I had ever been. I ran marathons. I traveled to Tuscany. I bought myself a diamond tennis bracelet to match the Cartier one on my wrist. I was living the life they had stolen from me in the previous timeline. I rarely thought about them anymore. They were ghosts of a timeline that no longer existed. But fate, it seemed, wanted to offer me one final poetic bow. It was a brisk Tuesday in November. I had just finished a highly successful pitch meeting at a sleek, glass-walled corporate high-rise downtown. I was in a fantastic mood, wearing a custom-tailored burgundy power suit, my heels clicking sharply against the polished granite floors of the lobby. It started raining heavily outside. the kind of freezing, torrential downpour that turns the city into a gray blur. I stood under the massive awning of the building, waiting for my driver to pull my black Mercedes S-Class around to the front. As I waited, a delivery van splashed through a puddle, pulling up aggressively to the loading zone just a few yards away. The side of the van was plastered with the logo of a cheap, generic catering company. A man jumped out of the driver's seat. He was wearing a plastic, transparent poncho over a cheap, ill-fitting uniform. He was drenched, shivering, and cursing under his breath as he struggled to pull heavy metal catering trays out of the back of the van. He turned around to wipe the rain from his eyes, and he froze. It was Davion. He looked terrible. The premature gray hair that had started in my previous life was now fully established, making him look 15 years older. His posture was slumped, his face lined with the deep, permanent exhaustion of a man who had been beaten down by life. He was no longer a shift supervisor at the auto parts store. Apparently, he had fallen even further down the ladder. He stood there in the pouring rain, holding a massive tray of cheap sandwiches, staring at me under the dry, illuminated awning. He looked at my tailored suit. He looked at the diamond jewelry sparkling on my wrists. He looked at the confident, radiant woman standing before him, the woman he had thrown away for a delusion of grandeur. For a long moment, the world stopped moving. There were no words exchanged. There didn't need to be. In his eyes, I saw the agonizing weight of his regret. I saw the absolute crushing realization that he had held a winning lottery ticket and set it on fire because his mother told him the ashes would turn to gold. My Mercedes glided up to the curb, the sleek black paint gleaming. My driver stepped out, holding a large black umbrella, and opened the rear door for me. I didn't smile at Davion. I didn't scowl. I simply looked at him with the polite, brief indifference one gives to a stranger blocking the sidewalk. I stepped into the luxurious, leather-scented warmth of my car. As the driver closed the door, I caught one last glimpse of Davion through the tinted glass. He was still standing in the freezing rain, water pouring down his face, clutching his catering tray as the doorman yelled at him to move his van. I leaned back against the headrest, closing my eyes, as the car pulled away into the bustling city. I thought about the sterile hospital room at Cedar Ridge. I thought about the beep of the heart monitor, and the feeling of the ring being pried off my cold finger. I opened my eyes, looking out at the beautiful, vibrant city passing by. They say karma is a mirror, reflecting exactly what you put into the world. Adelaide and Davion had put greed, betrayal, and cruelty into my life, expecting me to quietly absorb it and fade away. Instead, I became the mirror. I handed their cruelty right back to them, wrapped in a bow of their own arrogance, and let them destroy themselves. I survived the cancer of my past life, and I survived the cancer of my marriage in this one. I was finally, truly reborn. And my life was utterly spectacular. If you found yourself holding your breath and cheering for Chloe's ultimate revenge, you are not alone. Sometimes the most satisfying justice doesn't come from fighting your enemies, but from simply handing them the shovel and watching them dig their own graves. Did Davion and Adelaide get exactly what they deserved? Or was Chloe's calculated revenge too cold? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know how you would have handled a mother-in-law like Adelaide. If you love thrilling stories of rebirth, sweet karma, and unstoppable comebacks, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good revenge plot, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life drama stories. Ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next story.